Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for being here. My name is Horetzi. On behalf of all of us, we're thrilled to welcome you to today's summit session talk. Before I introduce our keynote speakers, I'm going to set the stage and give a rundown of what to expect during this call. First, in true summit session fashion, we aim to transcend the screen. So while we're together, if you can just go to your Zoom link, click on those three little dots in the corner and just hide self-view. I promise it will allow you to feel more present and with this amazing community for the next 45 minutes. The talk portion of today's call will be around 45 minutes, followed by a 10 to 15 minute Q&A session. Where you'll get to engage with our speakers on the topics discussed today. So I'm so thrilled to welcome all of today's speakers. Hello to Natalie, Bethany, Christine, and Amy. Just give a bit of an introduction here. Natalie Birnbaum is an attorney for healthcare innovation, gender equity, sex and law. Natalie Birnbaum is a healthcare innovation attorney at Nixon Gwilt Law. Natalie is co-chair of the Abortion Access Committee at the New York City Bar Association Sex and Law Committee, and she's been involved in reproductive health rights and justice for over 5 years, including working at the Center for Reproductive Rights, National Council for Jewish Women, and authoring multiple amicus briefs on behalf of reproductive justice organizations in the Dobbs case. Bethany Corbin is a senior counsel at Nixon Gwilt Law host, and she's a host of an incredible podcast called Legally Femtech. Bethany empowers pioneering femtech and healthcare innovation companies to achieve their goals with well-crafted legal counsel and strategic guidance. She partners with emerging digital health companies at the forefront of healthcare transformation to ensure they're building robust, scalable, and legally compliant companies ready to lead the industry. Bethany's strategic guidance and insights have been featured in top news outlets and publications, including Forbes, Fortune, Vice, The Hustle, and Crunchbase News. Bethany's also host of the Legally Femtech podcast, as I said. You can listen to it on Spotify. With Natalie and Bethany today, we're going to have a special guest, Christine Soto de Berry, founder and executive director of Prosecutors Alliance, which is an organization committed to reforming California's criminal justice system by advancing public safety, human dignity, and community well-being. She also previously served as San Francisco Mayor Gavin Newsom's deputy chief of staff and started her career as a public defender in the LA County. And with that said, I'm going to give the floor to Natalie, Bethany, and Christine. Thanks for coming today.
Thank you so much. Thanks for that intro. And we are so excited to be here today. It is such a privilege to speak to this group of innovators and to work together to brainstorm the available solutions to protect reproductive health rights and justice in our country in this post-Roe world. Yeah, got some slides. Awesome. Okay, so first of all, to understand how we can really move forward in the post-Roe environment, we need to really ground into the history of the reproductive health rights and justice movement and understand that the right for a woman to choose her own health care outcomes is not a new legal battle in our country. Before Roe, in 1973, nearly all states banned abortion except in limited circumstances. So also, for further context, it's important to understand that only in 1971 did the courts even recognize that gender was a protected class under the 14th Amendment's Equal Protection Clause. So that's kind of the environment in which Roe came to fashion. So in 1973, Roe versus Wade held that abortion is a constitutional right and set up a trimester framework, meaning that in the first trimester, abortion was permitted. In the second trimester, states had some ability to regulate. And in the third trimester, abortion was not permitted. So, okay, this was a constitutional right, but clearly in our Constitution, it doesn't say verbatim, abortion is a right. So where was this read in? So our justices and the court system read this into the right to privacy in the 14th Amendment. So essentially, after Roe versus Wade, the right to privacy in the 14th Amendment included the right to an abortion pre-fetal viability, so pre-third trimester. So just a note on the 14th Amendment and the right to privacy, you may have been seeing articles or different news sources saying that other rights are now at stake following this decision. So we're talking about interracial marriage, gay marriage, and contraception access for those who are unmarried. Why are these rights now suddenly also at stake? Well, because it's founded on the same legal principle of the right to privacy in the 14th Amendment. And as many of us know, the way the law works is that when one decision is made on the principle of precedent and stare decisis, it creates a basis for further decisions. So that's why there is conversation around this and fear that these rights will soon be taken away by this conservative leaning Supreme Court. Circling back to our abortion timeline. So in 1992, another critical case to the abortion movement came about, and this was Planned Parenthood versus Casey. Here, Roe was almost overturned, but instead the courts did once again codify or agree that the right to abortion is a constitutional right. However, the courts did also recognize in Casey that the states had a profound interest in potential life and created the undue burden test. So first of all, it's important to understand that now the states have a profound interest in potential life. Now this is recognized by the courts. This is the language that has been used from Casey up until today to justify states' decisions in creating more limitations to abortions. The undue burden test, which Casey established, essentially paved the way for states to create laws, making it incredibly challenging for abortion providers to keep their doors open, for doctors to provide abortions, and for women who needed them to access them. So there was just a flurry of new prohibitions, like 24-hour waiting requirements from the first doctor's visit to when a woman can actually get an abortion, prohibiting telemedicine abortion, even in states where it was a brick and mortar abortion was legal, creating reporting requirements for providers. So what this did ultimately, by giving states the power to create all of these different restrictions, was create abortion deserts throughout our country and a patchwork of accessibility. So these abortion deserts, we're talking about the South and the Midwest. And remember, we're talking about post-1992. So this is all leading up to today, before Dobbs, before this July. So it's also important to think about reproductive justice. So in the early 1990s, when Casey was at the court, the reproductive justice movement got a lot more national prominence. And what this movement is different than the reproductive rights movement, which is just talking about the right to access abortion. The reproductive justice movement is founded by Black Southern women and focuses on reproductive justice as a human rights framework centered around access. As Sister Song, the leading reproductive justice organization, would say, there is no choice if there is no access. So basically everything that I've been saying about access has been a huge issue and created just a disparate state of access throughout our country, even before the right was handed back to the states officially last month. We could turn to the next slide. Thank you. So where are we today? Following the Dobbs decision, we know that abortion is no longer guaranteed as a constitutional right, and states now have been given the power back to regulate abortion. So we have 7 states now that completely ban abortion, and 26 are anticipated to follow suit. We have abortion deserts, as we discussed, that have been present for decades in our country, and they're only being exacerbated. And we also have safe havens. So when we see like these blue states on this map, which is courtesy of the Center of Reproductive Rights, we see blue states which have expanded access. So states like Colorado and California and New York, which have protections for providers who are giving abortions. Now, it's also important to think about, who are these laws targeting? So are these laws targeting the women who are getting abortions? Or are they targeting providers? So it's very important to be clear that these laws are targeting the providers who are giving the abortions. There are exceptions, which are in states like Oklahoma and Texas, and I'm sure you've heard of Texas SB 8, which created an aiding and abetting provision, basically deputizing individual citizens to report anybody that aids and abets an abortion, so anybody that helps get an abortion. Aside from that, we're mostly targeting providers. So what we're seeing is different states like California, like I mentioned, Colorado, New York, Massachusetts has something in the works, talking about how they can protect providers that are being criminalized across state lines for providing abortions. So we don't know how this is going to play out in the courts. There are conflicting laws being passed in states. When they get to the Supreme Court, if they get to the Supreme Court, which it is likely they will, then these will be decided. But until then, there is just a lot of confusion, a lot of misinformation, and a lot of guessing. So instead of getting distracted with like the micro movements that are happening, it's important to stay focused on the future and understand that making abortion, taking away the constitutional right to abortion rather, is not the end game. The end game for the right has been and is still to introduce legislation banning abortion entirely and grant fetuses personhood status. So if the Republicans get control of Congress, this bill will come to the floor and it will likely pass. So we need to be focused on that. Another thing that's important to name in our country right now is the maternal mortality rates. So our country has the highest maternal mortality rate in the developed world, 55th highest of any country in the world, okay? This rate is 3.5 to 5 times higher for Black women. And a recent study just showed that the abortion ban will increase our maternal mortality rates by 24%. So these are the practical implications. We're talking about decisions that purport to save lives, but in reality, what's happening is that the lives of the already living, the lives of women, are being put drastically more at stake. It's also worth noting that there is congressional action being taken. Today, the Women's Health Protection Act, which codifies the right to abortion, was passed in the House. We'll see, hopefully it passes in Senate. It was also passed in the House in 2021. And furthermore, we've also seen actions from the executive branch, executive orders, creating a reproductive health task force. However, it's important to question the enforceability of these actions. As of right now, it is unclear whether or not the executive branch will actually do anything sustainable to protect abortion. What the executive branch can do is work through its agencies such as the FDA to approve over-the-counter birth control, to get rid of all risk and mitigation strategy requirements on Plan B and Plan C. So this will help, again, increase accessibility. And of course, while it's important to understand what is going on at the state by state level, what's going on with the different actors in our government, we all know in this community that what's even more important than looking at the individuals and looking at the actors is to take a look at process. And for business leaders, we need to understand what processes can we put in place in order to best protect reproductive health, rights, and justice and move towards the future. So I'm going to turn that over to Bethany to talk about this.
Thanks, Natalie. Happy to jump in here and very grateful to be part of this webinar series. So thank you so much. I want to talk now about some of the legal implications that we're seeing. And if we could just go back one slide, sorry. The legal implications that we're really starting to see with respect to telehealth and healthcare privacy issues, femtech trends, FDA, and some of the unique treatments that we see for abortion and contraception access. So I'm going to start first by talking about telehealth and healthcare and really what we're starting to see this decision mean for companies that are operating in that space, along with startup companies who may be interested in entering that space or building telehealth systems today. So first, one of the main questions that we have started to see concerns providers who are very much concerned about and also not entirely sure what it means if they're licensed in multiple states where they can be providing healthcare, where they are allowed to prescribe abortion pills and emergency contraception. There's a lot of confusion out there. And we're also seeing a lot of providers really wanting to now get involved in this space, even if they previously weren't involved in this space because they see an opportunity to help women. And I've started to see providers actually cross borders and obtain different types of licensure so that they're able to move into some of those border states where there might be a large influx of women who are coming across state lines to get the abortion care that they need. So with respect to telehealth, a couple of things to keep in mind would be ensuring that the providers are licensed in the states in which they are seeing the patients. Really, it is the patient's physical location that matters whenever we're talking about telehealth, and providers and healthcare organizations that operate in this space have to be very careful that they aren't prescribing abortion pills in states that have restricted abortion, so that they are not operating against the law, because as Natalie mentioned, a lot of these healthcare laws related to abortion right now are targeting the providers and not necessarily the women who obtain the abortions. So provider licensure and provider risk is really what we're concerned about whenever we look at it from a telehealth space. So making sure that providers, for instance, have mechanisms in place in which they can verify the patient's physical location when that patient obtains that telehealth service or tries to obtain an abortion pill by mail or through a telehealth visit. That's something that's very important, because it's not necessarily the patient's state of residence that's going to matter. It's going to be where that patient is physically located at the time the telehealth visit occurs. So that's something that providers, even if it's not required by state law, should really be thinking about in terms of location and identity verification for the patients that they're seeing. Providers also in the telehealth space really need to be thinking about how they're going to establish these new patient-physician relationships with new patients who are coming across the border for what may be a one-time telehealth visit. So providers who may be operating and seeing new patients who are trying to seek abortion care, especially in the telehealth context, will need to comply with the patient-physician relationship requirements of the state in which they're operating and in which they're seeing that patient. A lot of times that means that providers are going to have to do an initial visit in terms of collecting the relevant medical history, making sure that they're doing a quote unquote exam that would be comparable to what would happen during an in-person patient visit. Sometimes the laws will require that the physician follow the same standard of care as the in-person visit, or that they develop a follow-up plan of care, follow-up action, send medical records back to the patient's primary care provider. So if you're a healthcare organization or provider operating in this telehealth space, make sure that you have a policy and a procedure in place so that you're actually able to verify and document that you have established a patient-physician relationship before you go and prescribe any type of abortion pill, abortion medication, or abortion treatment. So that's kind of at a high level, things that we're seeing from the telehealth healthcare space. Another thing that we're seeing kind of on the patient side of that is really making sure that patients understand the risks of what happens if they obtain abortion pills in a state that allows it and then transports those pills back to an abortion restrictive state. So what a lot of patients are thinking that they can do today is go across state lines, have that telehealth visit, obtain those abortion pills, take those pills back to their home state and conduct the abortion there. That could pose problems depending on how the state law is actually written, because you're technically then conducting that abortion in the abortion restricted state. So providers right now are typically starting to recommend that their patients actually take the pills while they're still in the abortion protected state, rather than transferring the pills back across state lines, because there's some concern there, right, that the provider may then be accused of having aided and abetted or provided an abortion in a state that does not permit an abortion. So some things to keep in mind there. One of the main concerns, though, that we're starting to see a lot of talk of beyond just the telehealth and provider spaces is really privacy and security. That has really skyrocketed ever since the Dobbs decision was leaked back in May. So since the Dobbs leak, we have seen an exponential increase in consumers starting to worry about the privacy and the security of their reproductive health data. The reason for this is, as most of you know, right, there are ways in which law enforcement officers can access that data. And if a state law permits an action, right, or a prosecution against a woman for having an illegal abortion, that data could be used against her. That data may also be used to prosecute a physician who conducted that abortion in a state that has a law that is targeting and prosecuting the providers themselves. So there's a couple of different ways, right, in which law enforcement officers can get their hands on this data. The first of which is the law enforcement officer can go and subpoena that data or have a lawful court order requiring the company to turn over that data and go to, for instance, the Femtech app or the healthcare provider's office and request that data. The likelihood in which data is going to be turned over or given to the law enforcement officer is going to depend on a couple of factors. The first of which is going to be whether or not the provider, app, et cetera, is HIPAA protected. HIPAA meaning Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act. Because if you have a healthcare provider who's billing Medicare or insurance, that data is typically going to be protected by HIPAA. And under HIPAA, it is a permissible but not a required disclosure to turn over data in response to law enforcement officers' valid requests or subpoenas. Not required, but if a provider does turn it over, they're not going to be violating HIPAA. Contrast that to something like a femtech app or period tracking app, in which that data is not going to be HIPAA covered in almost all of the circumstances. HIPAA does not typically apply to these types of femtech apps that are on the market, unless somehow the femtech app qualifies as a covered entity or a business associate, which most of them do not, especially at the early startup stage. So law enforcement officers are going to have usually a much easier time trying to get the data if it's not going to be HIPAA protected. So that's way one in which they can go and get that data. The second way in which they can get that data is really through what's known as data brokers. So a lot of times these applications, femtech apps and other types of reproductive health apps, will have provisions that may allow for the downstream sale or disclosure or use of that data to third parties. And sometimes, especially in apps that usually have a free version, we see this more often there. It's definitely something we also see in apps that have paid versions as well. But selling data downstream to data brokers is typically going to be a revenue stream. And so that means once a data broker gets its hands on that data, it can go and sell that data. It can sell it to you, it can sell it to me, it can sell it to a law enforcement officer. And that's actually a way in which law enforcement officers can get data that they otherwise would need a subpoena to get from the app or the company itself. And Vice actually recently showed that for about $160, it could go out and buy data that showed, kind of the abortion clinic or Planned Parenthood site in which somebody visited, when they visited, where they went afterwards, where they came from. That data could then be used to re-identify who that individual was. So that's a major concern. One thing in which a lot of femtech companies are doing right now to try to prevent that is they're starting to limit their downstream sales and disclosures of data. So to the extent that they have other revenue streams and they're very conscious about privacy protection and security of consumer data, that's one avenue in which we're starting to see some decrease on the sale of that data downstream. A third avenue in which law enforcement can get this data is unfortunately through hackers. Right? So the value of reproductive health data has skyrocketed. Health data itself was already valued at about $250 on the black market. That's compared to a financial credit card, for instance, which might be about $5.60 on the black market. So you already have high value of health data. Now you add the fact that that reproductive health data in some states could be used to make a case for criminal action, prosecutions, all of that type of stuff. And so the value of reproductive health data to cyber criminals increases substantially, because if they get that hands on their data, not only does it mean that they can actually start to get more in terms of like more money from a ransomware, but that they can also go ahead and try to extort money from the individual woman herself. So something to consider there, right, would be making sure that the apps that you're using have strong privacy and security policies and procedures, making sure that they are using strong cybersecurity protocols. A lot of startups don't necessarily have that in place. And so making sure that from the femtech side, we're really pushing that type of information and those types of policies, procedures, protocols out to our consumers. With respect to FDA, one of the things that's going on there right now is some concern over and lawsuits over whether or not the FDA's approval of mifepristone and the abortion pills together, whether or not that's going to be sufficient or whether or not these state bans through telehealth to actually mitigate and put some barriers on the use of teleprescribing for the abortion pills is going to take over. So right now, there is really a conflict between state laws that say, oh, you can't teleprescribe the abortion pill, or you have to have an ultrasound first or a waiting period, which really makes it impossible to teleprescribe the abortion pill, versus the FDA, which has said, it's fine to teleprescribe the abortion pill. That's safe, that's effective, it can be mailed to your home. So we're seeing a conflict there right now between federal and state laws. And then finally, looking at some of the treatment for abortion and contraception, some things that are going on there would be the fact that, as Natalie mentioned, there's the potential that other rights could be at stake with respect to this abortion decision. So things like the contraception case with Griswold are now in, kind of in jeopardy. We've got privacy rights in jeopardy, but also here's the thing. we don't necessarily have to have these other rights challenged in order for abortion to impact them. So the way that the way that contraceptions or IUDs sometimes work is they have this backup method in which it prevents a fertilized egg from implanting. And if we have a state that defines abortion happening at the moment of conception or the moment of fertilization, technically those types of birth controls or contraceptions could be seen as facilitating an abortion. And so you could have a state challenge the use of contraception on that basis, not necessarily the basis of the Supreme Court and the constitutional right to privacy. So I'll stop there. There will be plenty of time to continue talking about legal risks during the Q&A. And Natalie, I'm going to turn it back over to you.
Awesome. Thanks, Bethany. Wow. Every time I hear you speak, I learn more. Okay. So I know a lot of us here have our own businesses, and we're thinking, okay, how can we as, business leaders and corporations work to help protect and ensure abortion access, reproductive healthcare access to our employees? And we've seen companies like Google and Amazon and countless others release these statements creating funds for employees looking to access abortion out of state, and so on and so forth. What we've also seen is, I don't know if anybody else is privy to this, but a law firm called Sidley Austin, which is one of the country's most prominent law firms, announced that they would also have this pool of money to offer to employees looking to get abortions out of state. And the governor of Texas issued a letter saying this is illegal. We're actually going to make this into a statute, saying that no company is allowed to offer such a benefit. Now, there are a few things here. One, while these benefits can be really helpful, it is still a new area of law and it's still hotly contested. Clearly, as I just described, when you have one of the country's top law firms offering such a benefit and then, a state government contesting it, we don't know how much of these types of benefits will actually be enforceable. Secondly, from a privacy perspective, and actually just practically bringing in these types of laws, how likely is it that employers that are pregnant are going to want their bosses to know, or anyone truly in their workplace to know that they're getting an abortion? And third, the companies that are offering that, typically the women that would need an abortion can afford getting an abortion already on their own in companies that are offering the service. So it's all really important, and the head is definitely in the right space. And better ways to protect privacy would be offering, a benefit for reproductive health care generally that perhaps would incorporate IVF treatments, fertility testing, days off for menstrual cycles, just a bank of money to help support women, support their reproductive health care. Things as simple as having a tampon tax in this country is an injustice to reproductive health care. And moving to our final slide, talking about the future, right? As business leaders, as people, as voters, how can we create sustainable policies that promote gender parity? So thinking about our workplace some more, simple things, looking at your pay gap. Are women getting paid equally in your company? There are a bunch of non-controversial policies that perhaps are less sexy in a moment like this, but are so important. Equal pay, paternity leave, increased maternity leave. If you have a brick and mortar office, do you have a lactation room for nursing mothers? What are your lactation policies generally? And on a more democratic level, are you giving your employees time off to vote in local elections? Is there an emphasis on democratic action? What are you promoting in your family, in your workplaces? Now more than ever, power rests in the collective. And it's so critical to take local action. So I'm going to pass the torch over to Christine, who will be talking about our ability to influence state prosecutors and the importance of that at a critical time like right now. Thank you so much.
Great, thank you so much. I'm going to be brief. I'm guessing that many of you on the call here today probably don't have much need to think about who your local prosecutor is in your county, but as you've heard from several of the presenters here today, a really critical component of the work we will do to defend women's rights to choose There's action you can take anywhere you are in this country. I'm going to post several things in the chat that you can use as local actions. We have a petition for California DAs, as well as a national sign-on letter and some social posts you can use to amplify this work and try to get more people that you know and love engaged in the conversation about urging your local prosecutor not to criminalize women's healthcare choices and to keep these very important decisions out of the criminal courts and where they belong, which is in the medical profession. So I'll post those things now. And I'll also add my email in case anybody wants to reach out about other ways to get engaged, but really pleased to be part of this amazing group sharing all this information. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Christine. Actually, I'm just going to add to what you just said, because the importance of prosecutors right now, maybe many of you have seen why Christine's work is so important, is you see state prosecutors all across our country right now saying things like, oh, I'm not going to enforce this policy, I will enforce this policy. And it's going back and forth like so deeply at the local level, where people that are living in certain counties are going to be having the laws enforced differently than people living in other counties. So thank you so much, Christine, for the work you do. And I'm so excited to look more into your resources.
Amazing. Thank you so much. I mean, all three pillars of conversation are incredible, from managing the workforce to knowing the nuances of state borders. I can't believe women have to go through that. And then also prosecution, how important that is and how that's going to be a leader and who could defend themselves and who not. So thank you so much for bringing all that to light. I'm going to bring our latest speaker, Amy. Hi, how are you doing? I see you there.
Hi, hey there.
Just
Thanks.
a quick introduction. Amy's an activist, artist, a co-founder and digital director of Plan C. So Plan C is an information campaign with a 50-state guide to abortion pills by mail and telehealth. Plus, she provides FAQs and medical and legal hotlines for safe, self-managed abortions. Amy's background's in nonprofit management and social impact startups, which led her to complex issues like volunteerism, human trafficking, and gender inequality. Ultimately landing on reproductive health equity as a core focus to Plan C. Amy's also a creative, and she's performed at a band called Formerly Alien, described as a post-apocalyptic conceptual. She also heads up design and communication studios, Eyes Open. Busy lady. But Amy, just want to give you the floor now. Go for it. Please discuss Plan C.
Thank you so much. So happy to be here. And thank you, Natalie, Bethany, Christine. There really are so many dimensions through which we can look at this one issue. So we're going to turn right now to public health, and specifically the option of self-managed abortion with abortion pills. And I'm actually going to present a perspective, if we can sort of hold it in contradiction, but also in equal consideration, that instead of further legitimating these legal barriers, we're going to recognize the unjust, racist, classist nature of the bans and identify breakthrough strategies on the public health front, and mobilizing individuals and tapping into our potential for collective power. So that's where we're headed. And starting with just a little bit of context of what is this method? What are abortion pills? So there are two types of modern abortion. The first is surgical or aspiration abortion, and the second is medication abortion or abortion pills. And this is actually a combination of two medications, mifepristone and misoprostol. The first stops a pregnancy from growing, and the second set of pills causes cramping and bleeding to empty the uterus. It's medically similar to having a miscarriage. So we can start by zooming out into a global context. This is an incredibly safe and effective method. It's really common all around the world. It's been around for decades. When MIFI was developed in the 80s and introduced as RU486 in France, it was called the French abortion pill, and it was deemed by the Minister of Health in France as the moral property of women. And in India today, 70% of abortions are with abortion pills outside of the medical system. So this is a health tool endorsed by the WHO as essential medications. It's so safe that it's been researched for decades and proven safe for self-use, recommended up to 12 weeks after last menstrual period, 98% effective at ending early pregnancy, And the medications are FDA approved with all of this data to guide us from here, really. So all of that to say that medically speaking, the option of a safe self-managed abortion is already here. And And just for some context on abortion, approximately 900,000 people a year in the US choose an abortion for all sorts of reasons. And at Plan C, we recognize a need for it to be readily available in all states through all methods, through clinics, telemedicine, and self-managed care. So I'm here today talking about abortion pills and self-managed because it is still unfamiliar to so many people and because of its breakthrough opportunities right now. But really, we're advocating for the full range of options for an individual. So Plan C is a public health information campaign. We started it in 2015, myself along with 3 public health researchers, first to just share information on self-managed abortion and pills by mail. We started to recognize that these online pharmacies were coming online. During the pandemic, there was an opportunity for telehealth because the FDA actually lifted some of the restrictions on the pills. And so over the years, our resources have evolved, and we have also broadened our campaign to become a communications effort. We partner with local and national organizations. We mobilize volunteers. We speak to the press, all under a vision of pills in the hands of the people who seek them. And this work is rooted in values of self-determination, of autonomy, and anti-domination. So the vision is a world in which the ability to end an early pregnancy is in the hands of the people who seek it. Our researchers believe the method is so safe and effective, it should be over the counter. And all of these legal strategies that we're talking about, we at the campaign see them as extremist politicians who are bullying providers, clinics, and even major healthcare companies to shut down essential services for their own political gains. So obviously this is extremely harmful. And this is why we continue to do what we do. We know that self-managing is safe. We know that people are already finding these pills online and using them on their own. And we know that this will continue for reasons of human rights to harm reduction. People will need this information more than ever. And again, it should have been made available years ago, like it is all around the world. So what is happening in the US right now? It's really important to describe that half of the country actually has modern telehealth abortion with services like Abortion on Demand, Hey Jane, Choice. In half the states, you can go through your telehealth visit, get your pills shipped to you, all like you would any other telehealth. And the other half has restrictions. And that's where people are finding these alternate routes of access or accessing travel, logistics, abortion funds for in-person care if they can, and if they want that, if they're seeking it out or need it for their medical reasons. So this is how it's been for years. It's not a pre or post Roe situation. Over the past few years, as these telehealth startups popped up, it started to highlight the inequities between the states. And starting in 2018, an international NGO called Aid Access recognized the situation from afar and realized that from sitting in Europe and having access to a pharmacy in India, they could start to serve all 50 states. So since 2018, Aid Access has been serving all 50 states with pills in the mail. And I can talk a little more about the nuance around that. You heard some from Bethany about the complexity of the legal, but a really important dimension to that is that self-managed abortion is not a criminal act. And yes, there are a couple states that specifically criminalize self-managed abortion, but as the lawyers mentioned earlier, it's really, really important right now to pay attention to the detail of these laws and who they are targeting, and also to continue to ground ourselves in what is the basis of these laws. And what the lawyers have told us about self-managed is that not only is it not a criminal act, but that those laws wouldn't hold up in court. We still have constitutional principles and values of body autonomy, of dignity, of self-care of our own bodies. So this is really important, again, to balance out the narratives that are creating so much fear and chaos right now, understandably so. And we know that in this country, the folks who are criminalized are often the communities that are already at risk. They're often the Black and Brown folks, Indigenous, people of color, low income, disabled, those already facing barriers to care. And that's why we do take so much care with the legal nuance, and why all of our information is continually being vetted by a legal organization as well. But to continue with the landscape, a few more points about it are that there are a few ideas coming through, like advanced provision. Many of these providers right now are actually providing pills in advance. I think Bethany mentioned this as well, that you can just go on right now, order the pills and have them in your medicine cabinet and take them as early as you know you don't want to be pregnant. And it's just like any other medication that a doctor would prescribe in advance. There's also new abortion funds popping up to serve people specifically with online and telehealth funding needs and reduce barriers to access with the economic part of it, and a set of free self-managed resources like the M&A hotline, which is medical providers answering questions, the Repro Legal helpline for anyone with legal questions, and EFF.org, which is digital security, as well as emotional support hotlines for people to just have companionship or get other needs met during this experience. Moving on to the two goals of Plan C are really simple. They're that people know about pills and where people are finding them, and the other context around self-managing an early abortion, and then that people have access to the pills. And so with people know, for the past 5 or 6 years, we've been getting the word out and spreading the word. More recently, we've had more national recognition and had opportunities to run posters in the New York subways. We have AOC blasting out Plan C's information saying, I will help anyone access abortion, and one has a moral responsibility to disobey unjust laws from MLK. That to me was like a big wake up, big tide change in this country, to see one of our politicians making statements like that. It's like, that's when you know that things are shifting in a really big way. And then I also wanted to highlight a few graphics from Shout Your Abortion. This is a different campaign, but they are taking a really bold stance, and they're basically reclaiming the legal language of aiding and abetting, saying we will aid and abet abortion. This is W. Makua Bell on CNN wearing an aid and abet t-shirt. It's really just this idea of collective power. We're taking it back. Who gives me the right and the ability to have an abortion? Does anyone have that moral authority over my body? That's the question people are asking right now. And so number 2, people have access. This is our guide. This is our number 1 tool, and this is has been visited by about 1.5 million people in the last year. The majority of folks come into our website, go to this page, and they choose a state from the dropdown, and they check out what's available for that state in terms of pills and other resources and other things they need to know. And what this system does is basically put the individual first, back, moving the locus of control back to the hands of the individual instead of the medical system or the politicians acting as gatekeeper. And we're really centering that individual so that they can make a decision that's best for them. We're not in the business of, holding back certain information or curating a particular set of information. We're trying to share everything that we know so that someone can make this decision for themselves. And really what we see as the road ahead, there's so much more we can talk about, but that's a basic snapshot. And here we are at a tipping point. The points I want to wrap up with are that the health technology is there, the distribution systems are there, the information is getting out. Of course, this is not a replacement for full reproductive rights and for full legal protections, but we have to know about these options and know about these, again, breakthrough opportunities. And we have brilliant lawyers pushing back on the impacts of the fall of Roe. So from my viewpoint, the movement, this moment in time, needs us to continue to support indie clinics and funds. They're still coordinating logistics and travel and staying afloat in order to continue to provide the essential services that they do. Number 2 is pills in hands. Again, making sure people understand abortion pills and potential points of access and everything else they might need to know. Advanced provision. There's other strategies like mail forwarding, which actually addresses some of these telehealth concerns. I didn't have time to get into that, but it's on our website, as well as these online resources like M&A Hotline and Repro Legal Helpline, all to mitigate the immediate impact of these bans. Number 3 is this idea about pushing back against the unjust laws. This all depends on a person's comfort and level of risk. But again, you can see these organizations starting to get loud And how they describe it is engendering a culture of defiance. And we're seeing this all over our society, right? Like helping people to question authority of the government in areas that it is operating from a racist, classist, incredibly harmful mode. And number 4, building the future models of care. So telehealth providers are innovating. There's groups like Mayday.health is a website that is all about mail forwarding, and they're basically approaching the problem like a tech startup would. And we need this. I've been waiting for this. It's happening now, and there are ways to get involved. And finally, we all unfortunately need to just stay engaged. It's rapidly evolving, and it will continue to do so. So let's pay attention. And just finally, how we can help. We can all share this information. We can all get up to speed on the method and the movement and the things that were touched upon today. You can donate. We at Plan C are a 501c3, and we're raising for the next 18 months of media campaigns and partnerships. And I can also share other donate ideas. And I'm here for you. I'm here for your questions, your ideas. This is finally a collective issue that is brought into the light so we can kind of understand how it fits into our society and make change. Thank you so much.
Amazing. Thank you, Amy, so much for sharing all that. And also Natalie, Bethany, and Christine.